Hello guys and welcome to this new video. Today we will be talking a little bit about opening theory and specifically about semi-Tarrasch position. And it starts after white goes d4, d5. And now we go for our standard queen's gambit with c4. And after e6 we go knight f3, and after knight f6 we reply with knight c3. This is the main standard position of the queen's gambit declined, and black simply has a lot of moves at his disposal. So, for example, black can go dc and play the Vienna, or he can go c6, knight d7, a6, bishop e7, or even bishop b4. And all these are legitimate options, and we will discuss all these moves in separate videos. But today we will be talking about the move c5, which is semi-Tarrasch. Now, before we dive into this position, there is a tricky move order which you should know about. And it starts after we go d4, black has this move knight f6. And the point here is that after c4, e6, if we simply go knight c3, black has this annoying move bishop b4. And this is the Nimzo Indian defense. And frankly, it's a very annoying opening to deal with, and it has a good reputation from the black side. And we simply would like to avoid this opening if possible. So instead of knight c3, we simply go knight f3. And only after black goes d5, now we go knight c3. And of course, black can go here bishop b4 anyway, but now we have this additional option to go queen to a4 check. And black now must go knight to c6. And this is another position that we will look at in a future video. And the key difference, if we had started with the move knight c3 here, is that now after bishop to b4, queen to a4 is not as much effective, simply because the pawn is still on d7 and black didn't play d7, d5, and there is no check. So black now can either take our knight or simply go c5, and he has a very, very solid position. But of course, all of this doesn't matter, simply because we will go knight f3 and we will avoid entirely this opening. And the move knight f3 is also called the anti-Nimzo Indian defense. And now after d5, we simply go knight c3, transposing back into our main position. Now let's go back into our usual move order. After d4, d5, c4, and e6, black goes for the queen's gambit declined, and we go knight f3, and after knight f6, we go knight c3. And semi-Tarrasch position starts after the move c5. Now in this position, we take on d5, and black has three sensible replies. He can simply take back with the pawn, take back with the knight, or take on d4. Let's start with the least challenging one, which is to take back with the pawn. Now here we go bishop to g5. And the point here is that we are attacking this knight, and indirectly we are attacking the pawn in the center. And if black does something like bishop to e7, now we take on c7. And after black recaptures, now black just drops a pawn in the center, and this is clearly very pleasant for white. And similarly here, if black takes on d4, we simply take the knight, and now the pawn on d5 drops. After queen d8, we take on d4, and after, for example, knight c6, we go back with the queen, bishop e6, and simply a long castle, and black is down a pawn, and I don't think there is much compensation for the pawn. So here probably ed is not black's best option. On a more serious note, black can simply take here on d4. And this is a very strong move, and it is the option that Wesley So chose against Magnus Carlsen in the Meltwater Champions chess show. So we should definitely take it seriously. Here we capture back with our queen. And now black regains his pawn in the center. And now because black has exchanged these two pawns first before giving himself the isolated pawn, now the bishop to g5 is not as much effective as in the first variation. For example, here after bishop to e7, we can just gain the pawn on d5 simply by taking the knight. For example, here we play like this. After queen takes, can immediately see that our queen will drop after this check. We will take the bishop and our queen drops. So here instead we hit the center immediately with the move a4. And this is a very direct and straightforward move which leads to a lot of simplifications, but I think that white has a more comfortable position in the resulting endgame. Now after black takes in the center, we exchange queens first and we go knight to g5. Now we are hitting the f7 pawn, threatening to fork both the rook and the king. And black has two ways to defend. He can go king to d8 or bishop to e6. The first one is bad. If black goes king to d8, we simply have this move bishop to c4. And now we are again hitting the f7 pawn. And now black has nothing to do other than play bishop e6 anyway. And we win a pawn simply. And this is a bad position for black. So instead, black here should go bishop to e6 first. And we simply grab the bishop. And now we are down a pawn, of course, but we will regain our pawn with a much more comfortable position. And to do that, we will simply go bishop to g5. And let's say after something like knight to c6, we castle long, hitting the black king, and after king to d8, now we go bishop to c4, hitting this pawn again, and after king to f7, now we take the knight, and we regain our pawn in the center. And we can see that there are a lot of imbalances in the position. For example, black has 3-point islands, when white has only 2-point islands. Also, white has 3 developed pieces. On the other hand, black's rooks and bishop are still in their initial positions. Also, white has control over the d file. So black's best move here is probably to challenge the d file immediately. And now we exchange and we go rook to d1. And let's say that, for example, black went knight to c6. This is a terrible mistake because it drops the pawn on b7. We go rook to d7 and the pawn simply drops. And here if black goes king to g6, the pawn on e6 drops. So here black has to defend with his bishop, and now we go rook to d7. And we can see clearly that in this position, white has the initiative and definitely has good chances to fight for a win. Let's check now black's most common move, which is to take on d5 with the knight. Now after the knight takes, we simply go e4, knight take on c3 and bc. C take on d4, c take on d4. And black's idea here is simply to give a check, exchange a pair of bishop, and quickly castle his king. And the black's development scheme is simply to go b6, bishop to b7, and put his knight on d7 and the rook on c8. And his position tends to be very solid and hard to break. So we have to play energetically in order to fight for an edge. So here simply we go bishop to c4, knight to d7, and we can see that black avoids putting his knight on c6 simply because we have this d5 move, and it can be very annoying with knight on c6. Now we castle our king, b6, and now we go rook to d1, adding more support to our pawn and enforcing this d5 break. Bishop to b7, hitting our pawn, and we simply go rook to e1, rook to c8, hitting the bishop, and we simply retreat to b3. And this position here is one of the key positions of the Semi-Tarrasch opening. And you should really understand the key elements of this position and know what are the possible ideas that you can go for. For example, one of the most common ideas that white has is simply to go for this d5 break. Another thing that white can try is to go rook to e3 and put his queen on e2, and then later on play for the d5 break. On the other hand, black's development scheme is probably going to be something like knight to f6, rook to e8, and simply put his queen on c7, and start to push a5, b5, and start to create some counterplay on the queen side. Now, for example, here if black goes knight f6 directly, here d5 is very strong. And we simply exchange the pawns, and now we are threatening to go d6, so black must blockade. After queen to d6, now knight to d4 is very strong, simply because threatening to go to f5, hitting this queen, and later on start to play to push our own pawn. And this position can be really dangerous for black. So instead here black goes rook to e8 first. And his idea is simply that after d5 he would be able to exchange a rook on e1, and this would release a lot of tension from his position. And of course we don't want to allow that, so we won't be going d5 immediately. And here there is this lovely waiting move h3. And the point here is that first of all we are waiting for black to make a move, and secondly we simply are already in advance controlling the g4 square, so that someday our rook might use the e3 square. And now after knight to f6, black is hitting our pawn, so we simply go queen to f4, defending the pawn. And here there are two main moves that black can try. The first one is to go queen to c7, claiming that after the queen exchange, his position will be very solid, he has no weaknesses, and simply your attack is over. Another move that black can try is knight to h5, hitting our queen. So let's start with the first one, queen to c7. Of course here if we exchange queens, our attack is done, and black is very solid. So we simply go knight to e5. Now we are hitting the f7 pawn, so if black wants to exchange our knight, he has to go rook to e7 first. And now we simply go g4, threatening to go g5 next. After knight to d7, here we simply go rook to c1. And after queen to b8, we exchange a pair of rooks, and we go rook to c1. Queen to b8, and now queen to g5, hitting the rook. So black must defend. Notice here that black doesn't have this move f6, simply because we will take the knight hitting the queen. And after the rook takes, bishop takes, and this is very bad for black. So instead here black has to defend with his queen. So now we go knight to c6, hitting the rook and the queen and getting the bishop. And I believe that this is a very difficult position for black. The d5 break is always a possibility. And also we have ideas to push our pawns and start a kingside attack. This position can be a little bit dangerous for black. If black here goes knight to h5, we simply put our queen back on h2. And we can see here that this knight can be misplaced here on the h5 square. And black should always keep an eye on the idea of d5. And this position can be also a little bit unpleasant. For example, here if black tries to get his knight back to f6 immediately, this is a mistake, simply because we go d5, and after black takes, we go e5. And black must go back to d7. For example, if black goes back to h5, knight is trapped after g4. And if he goes knight to e4, we simply take with our rook. After black takes, we take the queen. And notice that there is no mate here, simply because the rook goes back. And here after black takes, we go queen to f4, hitting the f7 pawn. So after black takes, we take on f7 and get the bishop. And this is the end. So black here must go to d7. And now we simply go knight to d4. And this position is very unpleasant for black. Simply we have a lot of threats. We can go knight to f5, queen to g3, rook to e3, and we can quickly create a kingside attack. And this position is actually very dangerous for black. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this content. Please let me know in the comments what openings you would like me to cover. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more videos.